"Just kill me fast," she said. Hell's Angel found her beaten by her stepdad. He hunts him down. The building had been dead for years. Ridge Callahan killed his engine half a block away and sat for a moment on his motorcycle, listening. The night air was thick with the smell of rust and old rain. Somewhere distant, a dog barked twice and went quiet. The street lamps along the industrial edge of Mill Haven threw pale, weak light across cracked pavement and chain-link fencing. Nothing moved. Good. He swung off the bike and pulled his leather vest straight. The Hell's Angels patch on his back caught a sliver of light as he moved toward the fence. His boots were quiet on the ground. Deliberate, practiced. Ridge was a big man, wide in the shoulders with thick forearms covered in faded ink. But he knew how to make himself small when the moment called for it. The old Harlan Textile building rose up ahead of him like a dark skeleton. 5 stories of broken windows and crumbling brick. The kind of place a town forgets on purpose. Ridge had heard rumors through the club's usual channels. Someone was using the loading bay on the east side for drops. Product moving through, maybe twice a month. Nothing confirmed yet, just whispers, and the kind of gut feeling he had learned never to ignore. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. He found the loose section of fence he already knew about and slipped through without sound. The loading bay door was rolled halfway up, frozen in place by years of rust. Ridge ducked under it and straightened inside. Darkness swallowed him whole. He clicked on the small flashlight clipped to his vest pocket and swept the beam slowly across the space. Broken glass. Old wooden pallets stacked crooked against the far wall. Pigeon droppings thick as paint across the concrete floor. A smell like mildew and something sharper underneath it. Chemical. Recent. He moved deeper in. The main floor was a maze of old machinery draped in rotting canvas covers. Ridge moved between them carefully, checking corners, checking shadows. His flashlight beam traveled across a collapsed section of ceiling near the back. Plaster and old timber in a heap. He noted it and kept moving. He found the first real sign near the east stairwell. A plastic bag wedged behind a rusted support beam. Empty, but the residue inside told him what he needed to know. Someone had been here recently. The dust around the base of the beam was disturbed, the footprints fresh enough to still hold shape. Ridge crouched and studied them. 2 sets, maybe 3. Adult shoes, all of them. He followed the trail with his eyes toward the staircase. The stairs were a disaster. Half the steps were collapsed inward. The railing had fallen away completely. Nobody was going up those stairs without serious risk. But underneath them, where the broken wood had created a kind of low, jagged cave in the shadows, Ridge noticed something that made him stop breathing for a moment. A flash of red. He moved toward it, slowly. Very slowly. His flashlight beam lowered until it was almost level with the floor. There, tucked beneath the broken staircase in the darkest corner of that dark building, was a child. A little girl. Tiny. She was curled on her side with her knees pulled up tight against her chest. A torn red blanket, dirty and fraying at every edge, was wrapped around her small body like she had been trying to disappear inside it. Her hair was matted and tangled. Her bare feet were gray with dust and cold. Ridge's chest locked up. He knelt down onto one knee, slow and careful, the way a man approaches something precious and fragile. His flashlight stayed low, so it would not blind her. Her eyes opened, dark and glassy, and full of something no child should ever carry. She looked at him without screaming, without moving, just looked. His voice came out softer than he knew it could. "Hey, little one, I'm not going to hurt you." She stared at him for a long moment. Her cracked lips parted. Her voice was barely a sound at all. Just a breath shaped into words. "Just kill me fast." Ridge felt something break open deep inside his chest. Something that had survived 30 years of hard roads and harder choices. It cracked clean through. He did not think. He did not hesitate. He pulled off his leather vest and wrapped it gently around her small, shaking body, tucking it close. Then, he gathered her up into his arms, holding her against his chest like she was the most important thing he had ever carried. And he walked out of that building into the cold, morning dark. The sky was turning gray when Ridge pulled up behind a narrow auto repair shop on the south side of town. No sign out front. Just a plain, metal door set into a concrete wall with a single yellow bulb burning above it. Ridge knew this place, had known it for years. Doc Reyes worked out of the back room, no questions asked, no paperwork filed. He patched up club members who could not risk a hospital visit. He was quiet, careful, and loyal in the way that mattered most. Ridge shifted Lila against his chest and knocked 3 times. Then twice. Then once. A pause. Then the door opened. Doc Reyes was a short man in his late 50s, with silver stubble and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He took one look at Ridge, then one look at the small body bundled in the leather vest, and stepped back without a word. Inside smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. A single exam table sat under a bright overhead light in the center of the back room. Metal shelves lined the walls, stocked with supplies organized with quiet precision. Ridge carried the girl to the table and set her down as gently as he could manage. She did not let go of his sleeve. Her small fingers gripped the fabric of his flannel shirt like she had decided this was the thing she was holding on to, and nothing on earth was going to change that. Ridge let her keep hold of it. He stayed close, crouched beside the table so his face was level with hers, while Doc Reyes pulled on a pair of gloves and began his work. What the doc found made his jaw tighten. Bruising along her ribs, both arms, the kind of marks that do not come from one bad fall. Old injuries layered under new ones. A small cut above her left ear that had not been cleaned. Her feet were cold and raw from the concrete floor. "How long?" Doc asked quietly, not looking up from his work. "Don't know," Ridge said. "Found her maybe 2 hours ago. Abandoned textile building off Route 9. Doc nodded slowly. He cleaned the cut with steady hands. The girl flinched, but did not cry out. She just watched Ridge the whole time, those dark eyes never leaving his face. Ridge talked to her in a low, steady voice about nothing in particular. The weather, the sound his bike made on a long stretch of open road. Small things, gentle things. She did not respond, but her grip on his sleeve stayed firm, and he figured that was enough for now. Doc wrapped her ribs loosely and covered her with a clean blanket. He looked at Ridge with an expression that carried weight. "She needs a hospital, Ridge, for the full picture. X-rays, the right kind of care." "I know. And she needs to be reported." "I know that too." Ridge straightened up and looked down at the girl. She had closed her eyes, exhausted down to her bones, but her fingers still held his sleeve. He made his decision right there, quiet and certain. "I'll take her to County General. I'll explain what I found." Doc nodded. "I'll write down what I observed here." The hospital entrance was bathed in the pale gold of early morning. Ridge carried the girl through the main doors, still wrapped in his jacket and the clean blanket Doc had given her. The lobby was half empty, a few people in plastic chairs, a nurse at the desk looking down at paperwork. He was 3 steps inside when the woman near the entrance stood up slowly from her chair. She was maybe 60, with sharp eyes and a phone already in her hand. She had been watching him from the moment he came through the door. He could feel it. She saw the tattoos first, then the girl, then the absence of any explanation she could make sense of. Ridge was still walking toward the desk when the woman slipped outside. Her voice carried through the glass as the door swung shut behind her. "Yes, I need to report something. There's a man here, a biker. He has a little girl, and something is very wrong." The nurse at the front desk looked up when Ridge approached. Her eyes moved from his face to the girl in his arms and back again. She picked up her phone before he even opened his mouth. "I need someone to look at her," Ridge said. His voice was calm. "She was abandoned. Found her a couple hours ago." The nurse spoke quietly into the phone. Too quietly. Ridge caught the words security and stand by before she set it down and smiled in the practiced way people smile when they are buying time. "Of course. Can I get your name, sir?" "Callahan. Jonah Callahan." "And your relation to the child?" "None. I found her." The nurse typed something and smiled again. "Someone will be right with you. You can have a seat just over there." Ridge did not sit. He stayed near the desk. The girl pressed against his chest. She had woken up during the drive over. She was quiet now, but her eyes moved around the lobby like a small animal reading an unfamiliar space for danger. Every time a door opened or a stranger walked too close, her fingers dug into his flannel shirt. A doctor appeared from a side hallway, young, with tired eyes and a clipboard. He introduced himself as Dr. Harmon and asked Ridge to follow him to an exam room. The room was small and white and smelled like rubber gloves. Ridge set the girl on the table but stayed close. Dr. Harmon began a gentle examination, talking softly to her. She let him touch her arm, then her side, and then she winced hard and turned her face into Ridge's shoulder. "She has significant bruising," Harmon said, almost to himself. He wrote something down. "Has she said anything to you?" "A little, not much." "Do you know her name?" "No." Harmon looked at Ridge carefully. Not with accusation exactly. More like a man working through a puzzle he had not been expecting this morning. He stepped back and spoke quietly to a nurse who had appeared at the door. Ridge caught the word social, and then the nurse was gone. That was when he heard the radio. Just a crackle at first, from somewhere down the hall. Then a voice. Low and official, the kind that belonged to a uniform. Ridge moved to the door and looked out into the hallway without stepping through it. Two officers stood near the nurse's station at the far end of the corridor. One of them had a phone pressed to his ear. The other was looking at something on a tablet screen. Then the one with the tablet looked up, straight at Ridge. Ridge pulled back inside the room. His chest was tight. His mind moved fast. He knew what they had. A tattooed biker. An unidentified injured child. A witness who had called from the lobby. No paperwork. No explanation that sounded simple enough for a hallway conversation. He could feel how the story looked from the outside, and it looked nothing like the truth. The girl slid off the exam table and tugged at his sleeve. She looked up at him with those wide, careful eyes. She did not ask anything. She just waited. He picked her up. Dr. Harmon turned from the counter. "Sir, I need you to stay here while we—" "I hear you," Ridge said. "I hear you. But those officers out there are not going to let me finish explaining before they pull her out of my arms. And she is not ready for that." Harmon stepped forward. "If you take her, that is a very serious—" But Ridge was already moving. He went out the back of the room, through a supply corridor he had clocked when they walked in. Old habit. Always know your exits. The girl pressed her face against his neck and made no sound as he pushed through a heavy door and out into a narrow parking alley behind the building. His bike was around the corner. He reached it in 12 steps. He strapped her in front of him, one arm holding her secure, and started the engine. He knew exactly where he was going. Doc Reyes had a second location. Smaller, more remote. A place nobody looked for. Ridge pointed the bike toward the edge of town and rode. The clubhouse smelled like oil, cigarette smoke, and old leather. It always had. Ridge had walked through that front door more times than he could count, and it had always felt like the one place in the world that made sense to him. Familiar, solid. Today it felt different. He sat at the long wooden table in the back room, the one they used for serious talk. Around him sat 5 men. Men he had known for years. Men he had stood beside in bad situations and good ones. Their faces were unreadable, which was never a good sign. Big Ray sat at the head of the table. He was the club president, a broad man with a gray beard and small, sharp eyes that did not miss much. He had not said a word since Ridge started talking. He just sat with his thick arms folded and listened. Ridge had laid it all out. The building, the girl, the hospital, the officers in the hall, all of it. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then, Big Ray spoke. "Where is she now?" "With Doc Reyes, at the secondary spot. She is being looked after." Big Ray nodded slowly, like he was filing that information away. "And you came here instead of staying with her because?" "Because I needed the club's help. I need people I trust to help me figure out what happened to this child. There is more going on than one bad situation. The things she said, the shape she was in, it is not just a bad home. Someone worked hard to keep this quiet." The man to Big Ray's left, a lean, older member they called Stitch, let out a slow breath through his nose. "Ridge, brother, you hear yourself right now?" "I hear myself fine." "You are sitting here asking us to get involved in a child welfare situation while there is an active police flag on you for possible kidnapping." Stitch leaned forward. "Do you understand what that looks like from where we are sitting?" "I understand what it looks like," Ridge said. "I also know what it is. And those are 2 different things." Big Ray unfolded his arms and placed both hands flat on the table. It was a gesture Ridge recognized. It meant a decision had already been made before this conversation started. "We have federal eyes on us right now," Big Ray said. His voice was low and even. "Not rumors. Actual surveillance. We have been careful for 2 years to keep things clean and quiet. And now you walk in with a missing child, police looking for you, and a story that even the people who love you are going to have a hard time swallowing." "She was beaten nearly to death," Ridge said. "She is 4 years old." "I believe you," Big Ray said. "I do. But believing you and putting the whole club at risk are 2 separate conversations." Ridge looked around the table. Some of the men would not meet his eyes. One of them, a younger member named Dex, stared at the table surface like it was the most interesting thing he had ever seen. "So, what are you telling me?" Ridge asked. Big Ray's eyes were steady, not cold exactly, but firm in a way that left no room. "I am telling you to stand down. Hand the girl to the proper authorities. Get yourself a lawyer. Let the system do what the system does." "The system," Ridge said quietly, "is exactly what she is afraid of. That is not our problem to carry." The words landed hard. Ridge sat with them for a moment, feeling the weight settle into his chest, like something heavy dropped from a height. He looked at Big Ray, then at Stitch, then at the rest of them, one by one. The room had not changed. Same walls, same smell, same table where he had sat 100 times and felt like he belonged somewhere in this world. But something had shifted, quiet and permanent, like a bone that would never sit right again. He pushed back his chair and stood up. The hidden clinic was not much to look at. It was tucked behind a laundromat on a side street that most people in town had forgotten existed. The sign above the laundromat said, "Bright Day Wash," in faded yellow letters, but the light in the sign had been broken for years. Nobody came here unless they already knew the way. Doc Reyes had set up the back room with the kind of quiet care that spoke of a person who had been doing this a long time. A single cot with clean sheets sat against the far wall. A metal tray held wrapped bandages, small bottles, and tools that Ridge could not name. A lamp in the corner gave off a warm yellow glow that made the room feel almost safe. Almost. Ridge sat in a folding chair beside the cot, his large frame hunched forward, elbows on his knees. His jacket was still with the girl, wrapped around her small body even now. She had refused to let anyone take it. Doc Reyes moved around the cot slowly and carefully, the way you move around something fragile. She was a small woman, in her late 50s, with silver hair pulled back tight, and hands that never seemed to shake. She had been patching up people outside the system for over 20 years. She never asked too many questions, but she always asked the right ones. "She has 3 bruised ribs," Doc Reyes said in a low voice, not looking up from the bandage she was wrapping around the girl's arm. "Old bruising on her back. Not from one time, from many times over a long stretch." She paused. "Someone did this to her, more than once." Ridge said nothing. He just watched the girl's face. She was asleep now, or close to it. Her chest rose and fell in small, careful movements. Like even breathing was something she had learned to do quietly. Her dark hair was matted and tangled against the white pillow. The bruise along her left cheek had deepened to a purple shadow. She looked impossibly small. Doc Reyes straightened up and looked at Ridge directly. "She needs rest more than anything else right now. Her body has been through a lot." She kept her voice even, but her eyes said more. "You staying?" "Not going anywhere," Ridge said. Doc Reyes nodded once, like that was the answer she expected. She set a glass of water on the tray beside the cot and moved quietly to the door. "I will be in the front room. You need anything, you knock." The door clicked shut behind her. Ridge exhaled slowly through his nose and sat back in the chair. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of something electrical somewhere in the walls and the soft sound of the girl breathing. He looked at his hands. Big hands, rough and scarred from years of hard living. Not the kind of hands that were made for this. Not the kind of hands built for holding something gentle. And yet here he was. He reached over and gently pulled the edge of his jacket a little higher over her shoulder, careful not to wake her. She stirred slightly, made a small sound, and then went still again. He settled back into the chair and kept watch. About an hour passed, maybe more. Ridge had lost track. Then the girl moved. Not much, just a small shift of her head against the pillow. Her eyes stayed closed, but her brow tightened, like something in her dream had changed direction. Her lips parted. Her voice came out thin and unsteady, the way voices do when sleep and waking blur together. "He has a nice smile," she murmured. Ridge went very still. "He waves at people." A pause. Another small breath. "He is the churchman." Her face relaxed again after that. The tension in her small brow smoothed out. She pulled the jacket tighter without waking up, tucking her chin down like she was trying to disappear into warmth. Ridge did not move for a long time. His eyes stayed fixed on her face, quiet and steady. The morning came in gray and cold. Ridge had not slept. He sat in the same folding chair, in the same hunched position, watching the girl breathe. The lamp in the corner had dimmed some time before dawn. The bulb, flickering once before, settling into a dull, tired glow. Somewhere in the front room, Doc Reyes had turned on a small radio. Ridge heard the faint crackle of a news broadcast drifting through the wall. He did not pay it much attention at first. News was always noise, always something burning somewhere, always someone pointing fingers at someone else. He had learned a long time ago to let it wash over him like weather. But then he heard his name. He stood up slowly, careful not to wake the girl, and moved to the door. He opened it just enough to hear clearly. The radio voice was calm and professional, the kind of voice that made terrible things sound like simple facts. Authorities are now seeking a person of interest identified as Jonah Callahan, a known member of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, in connection with the disappearance of a young child from the Delwood area. Callahan was seen early yesterday morning carrying a young girl, believed to be 4 years old, through the rear entrance of Mercy General Hospital, before fleeing the premises when questioned by staff. Police have described him as armed and dangerous. The public is urged not to approach. Ridge leaned his shoulder against the doorframe. He kept his face blank. But something behind his eyes shifted, slow and heavy, like a stone rolling downhill with nowhere to stop. Doc Reyes was sitting at a small table with a mug of coffee, watching him over the rim of it. She had heard it too. She did not say anything. She just held his gaze with steady, careful eyes. Ridge moved back into the room with the girl and pulled the door shut behind him. He stood at the foot of the cot and looked at her. She was still sleeping, still holding his jacket close with both hands, her small knuckles pale against the dark leather, armed and dangerous. That was what they were calling him now. He almost laughed, but it was not a funny feeling. It was the kind of thing that sat in your chest like a cold stone and just stayed there. He had carried a frightened child out of a rotting building. He had gotten her medical help. He had stayed awake all night in a folding chair just to make sure she kept breathing. And now his face was on the morning news. He reached over and adjusted the jacket around her one more time. Then he straightened up and walked back to his chair. There was nothing else to do right now but stay. So he stayed. Across town, the morning moved differently. The community center on Birchwood Street had a small meeting room that local groups used for everything from bake sale planning to volunteer coordination. On most mornings, it smelled like old coffee and folding tables. This morning, it smelled like camera equipment and nervous energy. 3 local news reporters had set up near the front of the room. Their cameras pointed toward a man standing before a simple wooden podium, his hands folded in front of him, his expression carefully arranged into something between sorrow and quiet strength. Caleb Mercer was a good-looking man. Medium height, broad shoulders, the kind of easy posture that made people trust you before you even opened your mouth. He wore a button-down shirt in soft blue, the kind of color that photographed well. His dark hair was neatly combed. His eyes were wide and honest-looking. He cleared his throat and looked directly into the nearest camera. "My daughter is out there somewhere," he said. His voice broke just slightly on the last word. Just enough. "She is 4 years old. She is frightened. And the man who took her is a member of a violent motorcycle gang with a long criminal history." He paused, pressing his lips together, like he was holding back emotion. "Please," he said, "please help us bring her home." The night had settled deep and quiet around the safe house. Outside, the wind pushed through the bare trees in long, slow waves. Inside, the only light came from a small lamp on the floor near the cot. It cast a warm, low circle of gold across the room. Everything beyond that circle was shadow. Ridge sat on the floor with his back against the wall. His long legs were stretched out in front of him. His hands rested on his knees. He was not moving. He was just listening. The girl had been drifting in and out of sleep for the last hour. Every time she dropped down into the deeper dark, her breathing would change. It would get faster, shallow, and then she would start talking. Not clearly, not in full sentences, just pieces. Small, broken pieces, like a plate dropped on a hard floor. He said, "Be quiet." Ridge did not move. The room with the lock. Her fingers curled tighter around his jacket. Other kids, too. That one landed differently than the rest. Ridge felt something shift in his chest. He leaned forward just slightly, not to wake her, just to be closer to the words. Other kids. He turned that over slowly in his mind. He had been thinking about it since she first whispered about the churchman with the nice smile. He had been trying to make it mean something small, something contained. One bad man, doing one terrible thing. But other kids changed the shape of it. He reached over and picked up the folded piece of paper that Doc Reyes had handed him earlier. She had found it tucked inside the pocket of the girl's torn dress when she was changing her into clean clothes. It was crumpled and soft from being held too many times. Ridge unfolded it carefully under the lamplight. It was a drawing, done in crayon, the way a 4-year-old draws. Wobbly lines and shapes that were hard to name. But in the corner, repeated twice, was a small symbol. It looked like a circle with a line running through it, and a short mark underneath. Simple, like something a child had seen many times and tried to copy. Ridge stared at it. He had seen that kind of symbol before, years ago, scrawled on the wall of a place he wished he had never walked into. He did not know what it meant back then. He had not wanted to know. Now he thought maybe he should have asked. He folded the paper back up and held it in his hand. The girl stirred again. Her eyes opened part way, glassy and unfocused. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she turned her head and found his face in the dim light. She did not look afraid. That small fact still surprised him every time. "You're still here," she murmured. Her voice was barely above nothing. "Still here," he said. She closed her eyes again. Ridge sat with the drawing in his hand, and the sound of her breathing filling the room. He thought about the radio broadcast, his name, his face, armed and dangerous. He thought about Mercer standing at that podium in his soft blue shirt, playing the part of the worried father so smoothly that half the county probably believed every word. He thought about the club, about Big Carl's voice, flat and final. "Stand down, Ridge. Walk away from this. Hand her over and let it go." He had spent 20 years following orders from men he respected. He had swallowed things he disagreed with because that was what loyalty looked like. That was the code he had chosen. And he had believed in it, truly, the way some men believe in a flag or a faith. But not tonight. He set the drawing down on his knee and looked at the girl's sleeping face. Caleb Mercer had stood before cameras and lied with the ease of someone who had done it 100 times before. The club had turned its back to save itself. And somewhere out there, if the girl's broken words meant what Ridge thought they meant, there were other children waiting in locked rooms. Ridge was done standing down. The cold crept in through the gaps in the cabin walls like it had a purpose. Ridge had found the place just before dawn, tucked back behind a wall of dead brush and leaning pine trees, invisible from the road unless you already knew where to look. It was an old hunting cabin, maybe 30 years unused. The wood had gone gray and soft at the corners. The single window was clouded with grime. Inside smelled like rust and old leaves and something animal that had long since moved on. It was perfect. He had carried the girl in while she slept, wrapped tight in his jacket, her cheek pressed against his chest. She had not stirred. He laid her down on the cleanest section of the plank floor and put his rolled-up flannel shirt beneath her head as a pillow. Then he stood at the window and watched the tree line until the sky turned from black to gray to the pale, washed-out white of early morning. Nothing moved out there, just the trees, just the wind. He let out a slow breath. The girl woke up a little before 7. He could tell by the way she blinked and looked around that she did not panic. That was new. A few days ago, waking up in an unfamiliar place had made her curl into herself like something bracing for a hit. Now she blinked, found his face, and settled. That small change meant everything to him. "Hungry?" he asked. She nodded just once. He opened the pack he had grabbed from the safe house supply shelf before they left. There were 2 granola bars, a small bag of crackers, a bottle of water, and a can of peaches with a pull tab. He opened the peaches and handed them to her with a plastic spoon. She ate slowly but steadily, sitting cross-legged on the floor, her dark eyes moving around the cabin like she was learning its corners. Ridge ate one of the granola bars standing up. He was not really hungry, but he knew he needed it. His body had been running on coffee and tension for too long. He pulled his phone from his jacket pocket. It was a burner, prepaid. He had picked it up 2 days ago, and only 3 people had the number. He checked the screen. One message from a number he recognized. It was short. Just 8 words. Dogs out. 2 counties. Move before noon. He stared at it for a moment. Then he deleted the message and powered the phone down. Dogs meant K9 units. 2 counties meant the search had spread farther than he had expected this fast. Someone had been tracking his general movement and narrowing the circle. He did not know if it was a cell tower ping, a witness sighting, or something else. It did not matter which. What mattered was that staying in one place for more than a few hours was now a real risk. He looked at the girl. She was still working through the peaches, unbothered, the syrup on her chin catching the thin morning light that pushed through the dirty window. He thought about what it would take to keep moving her, the cold, the roads, the weight of exhaustion that was already sitting deep in his bones. She was 4 years old. She had been through things no child should survive. And now he was asking her body to keep going, keep adapting, keep trusting a man she had known for less than a week. But the alternative was worse. Stopping meant getting caught. Getting caught meant she went back into the system before the truth was known. And if Mercer still had connections running through that system, protective custody might not mean what the words were supposed to mean. He folded the empty granola bar wrapper and pushed it into his pocket out of habit. He walked to the window again and studied the road through the smudged glass. Quiet still, but the kind of quiet that does not last. Staying in one place was a luxury he no longer had. He had to keep moving. Every day, every night. No settling, no routine, no trail. That was the only way to keep her safe. The diner sat at the edge of a 2-lane highway, like it had been forgotten there. Its sign was missing 2 letters. The parking lot was mostly cracked concrete, and one rusted pickup that looked like it had not moved in a season. But the lights inside were warm, and the smell of coffee and fried food drifted out every time the door swung open. Ridge pulled the truck around to the side of the building, away from the road. He cut the engine and sat for a moment, watching the windows. A waitress moved behind the counter. An old man sat at the far end with a newspaper. A woman in a dark green coat occupied a corner booth, facing the wall. 4 people total. Maybe 5. He could work with that. "Okay," he said quietly. "We go in, we sit down, we eat something warm. You stay close to me." The girl looked up at him from the passenger seat. She had started responding to Lila now, not every time, but enough that it had started to feel like her name. She gave him a small nod. He pulled his cap down low and helped her out of the truck. Inside, the warmth hit them both like a wall. Lila pressed against his leg as they walked in. He steered them toward a booth near the back, away from the windows, and sat with his back to the wall out of pure habit. The waitress came over, a young woman with tired eyes and a kind face. She looked at Lila for just a moment longer than necessary, then smiled and handed them laminated menus without saying much. Ridge ordered coffee, soup, and a grilled cheese for Lila. Lila sat across from him with her hands flat on the table, watching the room the same way he did. He noticed that about her. She had already learned to track exits. That thought sat heavy in his chest. The food came fast. Lila ate the grilled cheese in small, careful bites, methodical, like she was used to food disappearing before she could finish it. Ridge drank his coffee and kept his eyes moving. He almost missed it. The woman in the green coat in the corner booth had not looked at her phone once. She had not touched her food much either. What she had done, very quietly and without any obvious staring, was watch Lila. Not in a suspicious way. Not in the way the hospital visitor had watched them. This was different. This was the careful, practiced observation of someone who knew exactly what she was looking at. Ridge set his coffee cup down slowly. The woman caught his eye. She did not look away. She simply reached into her bag, pulled out a small card, and held it up just enough for him to see it. Then she set it face down on her table and slid out of her booth. She walked over without rushing. She stopped at the edge of their table and looked at him directly. She was maybe 60, with silver-streaked hair pulled back neatly, deep-set brown eyes, and the kind of calm face that had seen hard things and made peace with most of them. "I'm not going to make trouble," she said, her voice low and even. "My name is Maribel Knox. I spent 30 years as a child welfare social worker before I retired." She glanced briefly at Lila, her expression soft and careful. "I know what I'm looking at, and I know you're not who the news says you are." Ridge said nothing. His jaw was tight. Maribel did not push. She just waited, patient as stone. Lila looked up at her. She did not flinch or pull away. She just looked, the way a child looks at something that does not feel dangerous. That was what made Ridge stay seated. "How?" he finally said. "Because guilty men don't look at children the way you do," Maribel said simply. "They look away. You don't." She slid into the booth beside the wall, folded her hands on the table and said, "Tell me what she needs. I'll help you." The safe house was a small hunting cabin, tucked behind a tree line, off an unmarked dirt road. Maribel had known about it for years. A former colleague had used it once during a particularly dangerous case. She had never forgotten the address. The inside smelled like pine wood and old ash from a fireplace that had not been used in a while. There was a couch with a worn quilt draped over the back, a small kitchen table, 2 chairs, and a single lamp in the corner that put out a warm, amber glow. It was nothing special, but it was quiet, and it was safe. And right now, those 2 things were everything. Ridge had swept the perimeter twice before he would let them inside. Old habit. Good habit. Now he stood near the door with his arms crossed, watching. Maribel sat on the floor. Not on the couch. Not in a chair. On the floor, cross-legged, with her back against the front of the couch, and a soft blanket pulled from her bag spread across her lap. She had learned that a long time ago. Children who had been hurt did not trust people who positioned themselves above them. Eye level mattered. Posture mattered. Everything was a message. Even the things you did not say out loud. Lila stood near the kitchen table, still wearing Ridge's flannel jacket over her small shoulders. She had not taken it off since he gave it to her. She watched Maribel with quiet, careful eyes. Maribel did not reach for her, did not wave her over. She simply picked up a small box of crayons she had bought at a gas station and set them on the blanket in front of her. Then she placed a folded piece of notebook paper beside them and smoothed it open. She started drawing, just simple shapes. A house, a tree, a round yellow sun with crooked rays. She did not look at Lila while she drew. After about 2 minutes, small bare feet appeared at the edge of the blanket. Maribel slid the crayons a little closer without a word. Lila sat down. She picked up a red crayon and held it, but did not draw yet. She just watched Maribel finish the sun. "That one's a little lopsided," Maribel said softly, tilting the paper. "What do you think?" Lila studied it for a moment. Then she reached over and added one more ray to the left side of the sun, very carefully. "Better," Maribel said. The smallest breath of a smile passed across Lila's face and disappeared. They drew together for a while. No questions, no pressure, just color and paper, and the quiet sound of the lamp humming in the corner. Ridge did not move from the door. He barely breathed. After some time, Lila started drawing on her own section of the paper. A small figure. Then another figure next to it, taller. Then a box shape around them both. "Who lives there?" Maribel asked gently, her voice barely above a whisper. Lila's crayon slowed. "Me," she said. The word came out tiny and dry. "And the tall one?" Lila was quiet for a moment. Her crayon stopped completely. "He has a nice smile," she said. "At church." She pressed the crayon flat against the paper, not drawing, just pressing. "He told me he was good." Ridge's hands tightened against his arms. He did not move. Maribel kept her voice completely steady. "What was his name, sweetheart?" Lila looked at the drawing. Her small brow furrowed, the way it did when something inside her was pulling in 2 directions at once. "Kay." Caleb, she whispered. The name landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. Maribel kept her expression calm and warm. She did not react beyond giving a small, gentle nod. "And were there other houses?" she asked softly. "Like yours?" Lila's eyes stayed on the paper. Her voice came out even smaller than before. "Other kids," she said. "Other places. Same rules." Morning came in slow and gray through the cabin's single window. Ridge had not slept. He had sat in the wooden chair by the door through the whole night, listening to the sounds outside and watching the darkness thin into pale light. Maribel had managed a few hours on the couch. Lila slept curled on the narrow cot in the back room, still wrapped in Ridge's flannel jacket, her small chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of someone finally at rest. When Maribel woke, she found Ridge already at the kitchen table. He had spread everything out across it, every scrap of paper, every drawing Lila had made over the past several days. A few notes Ridge had written himself in his blunt, unpolished handwriting. Gas station receipts he had saved from locations Lila had reacted to while they drove. 2 torn napkins with symbols he had copied down from her drawings, because the originals were too fragile to handle much. Maribel stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, taking it in. Then she poured water into a dented pot and set it on the small burner to heat. "You should have slept," she said. "Couldn't," Ridge said. She did not push it. She made instant coffee from a packet she had in her bag, poured 2 cups, and sat down across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just looked at the table. There was something both heartbreaking and determined about that collection of papers. Crayon drawings made by a 4-year-old's hand, shapes that looked like nothing at first glance. But when you sat with them long enough, patterns started to surface like shapes in muddy water, slowly clearing. Maribel pulled the drawings toward her one at a time and laid them out in a row. "She draws this shape a lot," Ridge said. He pointed to a symbol that appeared in at least 4 separate drawings. It was a rough circle with a line through the middle and a small cross drawn underneath. Not a perfect shape, but consistent enough that each version looked like the same thing. Maribel leaned in close. She studied each one carefully. "She draws it near the buildings," she said quietly. "Look, in this one it's on the wall. In this one it's above the door of the box shape she drew." Ridge nodded. He had noticed that too, but had not been sure what to make of it. "A marker," he said, "like a sign." Maribel sat back and wrapped both hands around her cup. Her eyes moved slowly across the row of drawings, the way a person reads something important, making sure they catch every word. "Social workers get trained to look at children's drawings," she said. "Not as evidence, but as communication. Kids who can't say something in words will draw it instead. They don't even always know they're doing it." She tapped the recurring symbol gently. "She has drawn this same shape 8 times across 6 different pictures. Children don't repeat something that many times, unless it meant something real to them." Ridge pulled one of the napkins toward him. He had copied the symbol down himself after the 3rd time he saw it in her drawings. Looking at it now, alongside the originals, it was unmistakably the same shape every time. "She mentioned other houses," he said. His voice was low. "She did," Maribel said. He lined up the drawings that contained buildings. There were 5 of them. Each one showed a different structure. Some were small boxes. One had 2 floors. One appeared to have a fence around it. But in 4 out of the 5 drawings, the same symbol appeared somewhere on or near the building. Maribel pulled those 4 drawings into a separate group and set them apart from the rest. She and Ridge stared at them side by side. 4 drawings, 4 different locations based on the shapes and details around each building. One symbol tying all of them together. And in the corner of 3 of those drawings, drawn in the same dark blue crayon each time, was a tall, smiling figure with neat lines for clothing, and something rectangular in his hand that looked very much like a book. The Hells Angels clubhouse sat at the end of a gravel road behind a chain-link fence, topped with rusted wire. From the outside, it looked like nothing. A squat concrete building with no signage and two floodlights bolted above the steel door. A handful of motorcycles sat in the lot, their chrome catching the yellow glow of the lights. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. 8 men sat around the long table in the back room. Some had their arms crossed. Some leaned forward with their elbows on the wood. All of them were quiet in the particular way that men get quiet when something serious is sitting in the center of the room and nobody wants to be the first one to touch it. Dale Pruitt sat at the head of the table. He was 61 years old, with a white beard cut close and eyes the color of cold creek water. He had run this chapter for 11 years. In that time, he had guided them through police raids, internal disputes, rival threats, and the slow grind of staying invisible when invisibility was the only protection they had. He did not raise his voice often. He did not need to. "Let me say it plain," Dale said. He set his hands flat on the table. "Ridge is wanted by law enforcement. He has a child in his custody that the public believes he took. Every news station in the state has his face on it. And he is refusing to stand down." Silence. Dale looked around the table slowly. That makes him a liability to every single person in this room. From the far end of the table, a man named Cord shifted in his seat. He was younger than most of the others, maybe 35, with a thick scar across his left forearm that he had never explained to anyone. He had ridden with Ridge for 6 years, before Ridge went his own direction. He knew him better than most of the men in that room. "He found a 4-year-old girl beaten half to death," Cord said. "That's the starting point here. That's what we're talking about before anything else." "I know what he found," Dale said. His tone was not cruel, but it was firm. "That doesn't change our position." "It changes mine," Cord said. A man across from Cord, older, heavier, named Burl, let out a low sound that was not quite a laugh. "You want federal agents crawling through this place over one man's decision? Ridge made his choice. Nobody made it for him." "He made the right choice," Cord said. "That is not the point," Dale said. He pressed his hands harder against the table. "What's right and what's safe for this organization are two different conversations. I have 32 men to think about. 32 families. I cannot put all of that at risk, because Ridge decided to go rogue over a situation that is now completely out of control." The room stayed quiet for a long moment. A man named Hatch, who was sitting 2 seats down from Dale and had not said anything yet, cleared his throat. He was 50 years old with deep lines in his face and a silver patch on his vest that he had earned a long time ago. He spoke slowly. "So what are we saying officially?" Hatch asked. "We're done with him?" Dale did not flinch. "Officially, this club has no involvement in what Ridge is doing. We don't know where he is. We don't support his actions. If anyone asks, that is the answer." Hatch nodded once. His expression did not change. But later, after the meeting ended and the men moved out into the lot in small groups, Cord walked to his bike without a word. Hatch followed a few steps behind. They stood together near the far edge of the lot where the floodlights didn't quite reach. Cord spoke first, his voice barely above the sound of the wind moving across the gravel. "You know where he is?" Hatch looked straight ahead. "Not yet," he said. "But you're looking," Cord said. Hatch pulled on his riding gloves slowly. "Didn't say that." But he didn't say he wasn't either. The storage facility sat off a 2-lane road about 9 miles east of town. It was the kind of place that nobody really noticed. A long row of orange metal doors facing a cracked asphalt lane. A rusted gate with a keypad. A single security camera mounted on a post near the entrance. Its lens fogged and tilted slightly downward, like it had given up watching. Maribel had found the unit through a paper trail so thin it was almost invisible. A payment record buried inside a community organization's volunteer expense report. The organization ran events at Caleb Mercer's church. The storage unit was registered to a shell name. but the payment routing number connected back through 2 steps to an account Mercer controlled. She had explained all of this to Ridge in the front seat of a borrowed truck that morning, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, and a manila folder open on her lap. Ridge had listened without interrupting. That was one of the things Maribel had come to notice about him. When something mattered, he went very still and very quiet. He was still quiet now as they walked the row of orange doors in the late afternoon light. The sun was low and pale. Long shadows stretched across the asphalt. The air smelled like rust and dried grass. "Third from the end," Maribel said, checking the number she had written on the back of her hand in blue pen. The unit had a padlock on it, a heavy one. Ridge looked at it for a moment, then pulled a small tool roll from his jacket pocket. He had not explained where he got it, and Maribel had not asked. Within 2 minutes, the lock clicked open, and he pulled it free. He lifted the metal door. It rolled up with a sound like distant thunder. The unit was not large, maybe 10 feet deep and 8 feet wide. No furniture, no boxes of old clothes or forgotten holiday decorations like the units on either side of it probably held. Just shelves. Metal wire shelves bolted to both side walls, and on those shelves, stacked with a neatness that felt deliberate and cold, were plastic storage bins. All clear, all lidded, all labeled with nothing but numbers written in black marker. Maribel stepped inside first. She pulled on a pair of latex gloves she had tucked into her coat pocket before leaving that morning. Ridge watched from just inside the doorway, letting her lead. He crossed his arms over his chest and leaned against the doorframe. His jaw was tight. Maribel lifted the lid off the nearest bin. Inside were notebooks, spiral-bound, the kind you could buy anywhere. She picked up the top one and opened it carefully. The pages were filled with columns. Dates on the left side, numbers in the middle, short letter codes on the right. Nothing spelled out, nothing obvious. But Maribel had spent 23 years as a social worker. She had seen coded record-keeping before. She had testified in 2 court cases where documentation like this had been central evidence. She turned to the next page. Then, the next. Her face changed. It happened slowly, the way color drains from the sky after sunset. A quiet shift that Ridge noticed immediately. "What is it?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. Maribel set the notebook down and picked up another from the bin. Opened it, scanned the first 3 pages without saying anything. Then she set that one down too and looked at the shelves. There were 7 bins on the left wall, 6 on the right. "These are records," she said. Her voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. Dates, locations, and codes that almost certainly identify individuals. She paused. "There are a lot of entries, Ridge." He pushed off the door frame and walked to the shelf. He looked at the open notebook without touching it. The columns went on for pages, line after line after line. Ridge counted the bins on the shelves without meaning to. 13 total. He stopped counting. The motel was called the Pine View. There were no pine trees anywhere near it, just a parking lot, a vending machine with a broken light, and a row of rooms with thin curtains that let in the glow of passing headlights. Ridge had paid cash. He used a name that was not his. The man behind the desk had not looked up once. Room 7 was small and smelled like old carpet, and the faint ghost of someone's fast food from days ago. 2 beds with faded green covers. A round table near the window with 2 chairs. A bathroom with a flickering light that buzzed softly every few seconds. It was enough. Maribel had spread everything across both beds and the table before the sun had fully gone down. The notebooks from the storage unit. Photographs she had taken with her phone of the bin labels and shelf arrangement. A hand-drawn map Ridge had started on a legal pad during the drive over. Notes she had written in her careful, small handwriting on index cards she always kept in her coat pocket. Ridge stood at the table and looked at all of it. Lila was asleep on the far bed, tucked under the green cover with her small back to the room. She had fallen asleep, holding the edge of the blanket the same way she had held that torn red one the night Ridge found her. He had noticed that. He always noticed things like that now. He pulled his eyes back to the table. "Walk me through it again," he said quietly. Maribel sat in one of the chairs and picked up the first notebook. She had been working through the letter codes for the past hour, cross-referencing them against a list she had built from Lila's fragmented words, the drawings, and the location symbols they had mapped the morning before. "The letter codes on the right side of each column," she said. "I thought at first they were initials, but they are not names. They are places." She pointed to her index cards, each one labeled with a 2-letter combination. This one, PH, shows up 17 times across 3 different notebooks. Lila mentioned a house with a porch painted yellow. I think PH means porch house. Ridge looked at the card, then at the notebook page. "And this one," Maribel continued, tapping another card. "WL. It appears 11 times, always paired with a number that matches a day of the week based on the date columns." She paused. Lila said once, when she was half asleep, that she remembered water sounds. "Like a lake." "WL," Ridge said. "Water, lake. That is my guess." He picked up the legal pad with the hand-drawn map. It was rough, but it held the bones of something real. A cluster of location markers in the center of the county. 2 outlying marks further east. 1 almost at the county line. Maribel stood and came to stand beside him. She laid 3 of the index cards next to the map. The 2-letter codes matched 3 of the location markers he had placed, based on other clues they had gathered over the past several days. They both stood there looking at it. The buzzing bathroom light clicked and hummed. Outside, a car passed slowly. Its headlights swept across the curtain and faded. "How many locations do you think we're looking at?" Ridge said. Maribel studied the map. She studied the notebooks. She counted under her breath. "At minimum," she said, 6, possibly 8. She set her hands flat on the table. "And the dates in these records go back almost 4 years." 4 years. Ridge set the legal pad down. He looked at the scattered cards and open notebooks and the map with its rough marks. It was messy and incomplete and built from fragments and a child's broken memories. But it was there, real and visible and connected. Thread by thread, the shape of something hidden was becoming something they could actually see. "It is big," Ridge said. "It is," Maribel said. "But every location in these records is attached to a date, a code, and a financial entry." She looked at him. "That means every piece of it leaves a trail." The morning news came through Maribel's phone just after 6. She had woken before Ridge and was sitting at the table with a cup of instant coffee from the small machine on the bathroom counter. She had her reading glasses on. Her coat was already over her shoulders like a blanket against the early chill. She turned the volume down low and watched. The anchor on the screen was a woman with neat hair and a steady voice. Behind her, a graphic showed a photo of Ridge. It was an old one, grainy, taken from some distance at what looked like a rally 2 summers ago. In the photo, he looked exactly like what people feared. Big, tattooed, hard-faced. Maribel watched the screen without blinking. The anchor spoke in careful, measured sentences. A wanted man. A child still in danger. New evidence had emerged overnight. A vest matching the description of a Hells Angels member had been found near an abandoned property in the next county. The property, the anchor explained, had been flagged twice before in connection with child endangerment reports. Maribel set her coffee down. She read the text crawl at the bottom of the screen. Law enforcement was expanding the search radius. A tip line had been established. Caleb Mercer had given a second statement the evening before, his voice breaking at just the right moment, asking the public to help bring his stepdaughter home safely. Ridge came out of the bathroom. He had barely slept. She could see it in the heaviness around his eyes and the stiff way he moved his shoulders. He looked at the phone screen. She did not need to explain. He watched for a moment. Then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down slowly. "The vest," he said. "They are saying it was found last night. It was not mine." His voice was flat and certain. "I have not been in that county in weeks." "I know," Maribel said. He looked at the screen again. The photo of his face, the careful language of the anchor, every word chosen to make him sound like a predator. "Someone planted it," he said. Maribel nodded once. The bathroom light buzzed. Lila was still asleep. By mid-morning, Maribel had 3 text messages from a number that Ridge recognized as belonging to a club member named Dex. Dex was one of the quiet ones. Not leadership. Not loud, but steady. He had left a bag of supplies outside a gas station 2 nights ago without being asked. He had rerouted a police scanner tip once through a second phone number, so the signal traced away from their direction. The messages were short. The first said, "They pulled footage." The second said, "Someone talked." The third said, "Do not call me again." Ridge read them 3 times. He set the phone down on the table. Maribel watched him. He stood up and walked to the window. He did not pull the curtain aside. He just stood near it, still, quiet. The kind of quiet that was not calm at all, but just holding itself together. "Dex," he said. "Was he reliable before?" Maribel asked. "He was." Ridge turned from the window. "Someone got to him. Or got to someone near him. Either way, the path from Dex to us just got closed." He moved to the bed where Lila was still curled under the green cover. He stood at the edge and looked at her for a moment. Her small hand was tucked under her cheek. Her breathing was slow and even. Then he turned back to the room. "We need to move," he said. "Not in an hour. Now." Maribel was already folding the index cards, already gathering the notebooks. Her movements were quiet and quick, the way someone moves when they have learned not to panic, but also not to waste a single second. Ridge picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. The motel room that had felt like enough last night felt like a trap now. He went to wake Lila gently. The rest stop was the kind of place no one remembered after they left it. A single concrete building with a flat roof, and 2 vending machines humming under a rust-stained overhang. A row of parking spaces with faded yellow lines. A trash can chained to a post. A map of the state behind scratched plexiglass that no one looked at anymore. It sat off a county road between 2 empty fields. Dry grass ran along the fence line in both directions. The sky was pale and wide above it, the kind of afternoon sky that gave no color and no warmth. Ridge pulled the truck into the far end of the lot, away from the building. He cut the engine and sat for a moment. Maribel had gone ahead to a contact an hour east. She had taken the notebooks and the coded documents in a bag tucked under a spare jacket. The plan was simple. She would reach the contact, secure a safer location, and Ridge would follow with Lila once he had what they needed. It was supposed to take 20 minutes. He looked at Lila in the back seat. She was awake. She had been awake most of the drive, watching the flat fields move past the window with those dark, steady eyes of hers. She did not fidget. She did not ask questions. She just watched the world go by like she was deciding whether or not to trust it. She had gotten better about that in small ways. She would reach for his sleeve sometimes. She would lean slightly against his arm when she was tired. She had laughed twice in the last few days, both times sudden and surprised, like she had not known it was coming. But she was still quiet in ways that sat heavy in his chest. "I need to go get something from that machine," Ridge said, tilting his head toward the vending area. "Food. Takes 2 minutes. You stay right here. Lock goes down when I step out." Lila looked at him. 2 minutes, she said softly. 2 minutes, he confirmed. He watched her pull the door lock down herself. A small act of control. He had learned to notice those. She did better when she could do something herself. He stepped out into the cold afternoon air and walked toward the vending machines. His boots scraped the cracked concrete, He fed dollars into the machine without looking away from the truck for more than a few seconds at a time. He punched the buttons. A bag of crackers, peanut butter cups, a bottle of water. He was watching the truck the entire time. That was what made it impossible to understand later. Because he was watching. He had the water in his hand and was turning back when the dark blue sedan pulled in from the road. It came in quietly. No siren, no lights. It parked alongside the truck with a kind of practiced calm that looked ordinary from a distance. Two people stepped out. A man in a gray jacket. A woman in a navy blazer. The woman had a lanyard around her neck. The man had a folder under his arm. Ridge was already moving. He was 15 feet away when the woman opened the truck door. Lila had unlocked it. He did not know why. Maybe the lanyard looked official. Maybe the woman's voice through the glass had sounded safe. Maybe 4 years old was just not enough life to know the difference between someone coming to help and someone coming to take. "Hey," Ridge said. Loud, hard. The man stepped into his path. "Sir, we are with the County Child Welfare Division. We have an emergency placement order. Get out of my way. Sir, I need you to stay calm." Behind the man, Ridge could see the woman lifting Lila from the back seat. Lila was not screaming. She was just looking back over the woman's shoulder with wide, still eyes, looking at Ridge. The man's hand pressed flat against Ridge's chest. "This child is now in protective custody." The sedan door closed. The engine turned over, and Ridge stood in the empty parking lot, holding a bottle of water and a bag of crackers, while the blue sedan pulled out onto the county road and disappeared into the pale afternoon. The farmhouse smelled like old wood and forgotten seasons. Ridge sat on the floor with his back against the wall beneath a window that had lost its glass years ago. Cold air moved through the gap in slow, steady pulls. Outside, the fields were black. No lights, no road sounds. Nothing but wind moving through dry grass and the occasional creak of the house settling around him. He had found the place by instinct more than memory. A dirt road off a county route. A collapsed fence post at the turn. A structure that looked like it had given up on standing, but had not quite fallen yet. He had driven here with no plan, just movement. Just the need to put distance between himself and that rest stop parking lot before he did something that could not be undone. The water bottle was still in his hand. He had not opened it. The crackers and peanut butter cups sat on the floor beside him, still in the wrapper. He had bought them for her. His hand had reached for the peanut butter cups because he had watched her eyes go to them in a gas station 2 days ago. She had not asked. She never asked. But he had noticed. He set the bottle down slowly. He pressed his palms flat against his thighs and stared at the far wall of the empty room. Plaster crumbling off the lath. A dark square where a mirror or picture had once hung. A length of wire coiled near the baseboards. He had been watching the truck. He had been watching it the whole time. That thought kept coming back. Flat and useless. He had been watching, and it had still happened. And no amount of replaying it was going to change the outcome or make him feel like less of a failure. He dropped his head back against the wall. Lila's face came to him immediately. The way she had looked over the woman's shoulder as the car door closed. Not crying. Not reaching out. Just looking at him with those quiet, dark eyes that had already learned not to expect rescue. That look was worse than anything else. He had been her rescue. For a short stretch of terrible days, he had been the one thing standing between her and whatever came next. And he had stepped away for 2 minutes to buy crackers, and the world had moved in the space of that gap and taken her. The guilt sat in his chest like something physical, dense, immovable. He breathed through it, once, twice. He had seen men go 2 ways when guilt hit them that hard. Some folded into it, stayed on the floor. Let it become the reason they stopped moving. Let it become the story they told themselves for years about why they never tried again. Others let it turn into fuel. Ridge had always been the second kind. He pulled the folded paper from inside his jacket. A page he had torn from one of Maribel's notes before she had left with the bag. A list of names, location codes, the symbol that had appeared in 3 different places across Lila's drawings. A cross with one arm shorter than the other, and a number beneath it. He spread it flat on his knee and looked at it in the dark. He had the beam of a small flashlight in his front pocket. He clicked it on and held it close. He was not running anymore. That thought arrived clean and certain, without drama. He had spent days in motion trying to keep Lila safe and stay ahead of people who wanted to stop him. He had been reactive, always one step behind the next problem. He had been surviving. Surviving was over. He had the storage unit records in his memory. He had Maribel. He had the names on this paper and the coded locations Lila had drawn without even knowing what they meant. And now he had a reason that had nothing left to do with self-preservation. He folded the paper back into his jacket and reached for the water bottle. He was hunting. Maribel Knox did not sleep well in unfamiliar places. She had spent the night in the back room of a laundromat owned by a woman named Dottie, an old contact from her years in county social services, who asked no questions and left a clean pillow on the cot without being asked. The machines out front ran through the night. The sound of tumbling drums and warm air moving through old vents had kept Maribel somewhere between awake and restless until the gray light of morning crept under the door. She was up before 6. She sat at a small folding table with a gas station coffee going cold beside her, and a legal pad covered in careful handwriting laid flat in front of her. Names, dates, location codes pulled from Lila's drawings, financial reference points from the storage unit documents that Ridge had managed to photograph before they had been forced to move. She had been organizing it all night in her head. Now it was on paper. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone. She scrolled past a dozen numbers she had once trusted and no longer did. Old colleagues, former supervisors, a county rep she had worked with on a task force years ago who had since moved into politics and taken his principles with him. She stopped on a name near the bottom of her contacts. Detective Renata Solis. Maribel had worked alongside Renata on 2 separate child welfare investigations years ago. Renata had been young then, sharp, the kind of officer who stayed late because the case stayed with her, not because anyone was watching. Maribel had seen her sit on a hospital floor to talk to a frightened child at eye level when every other adult in the room stood at full height and spoke too loud. That kind of instinct did not leave a person. She pressed call. It rang 3 times. Then, a cautious voice answered. Solis. Renata. Maribel kept her voice steady. It's Maribel Knox. A pause, short but meaningful. Maribel. Renata's voice shifted slightly. Not cold, careful. It's been a while. It has. Maribel looked down at her legal pad. I need 15 minutes, unofficial. Another pause. Longer this time. Are you connected to the Callahan situation? Renata asked. Yes, Maribel said. She did not flinch from it. But not the way the reports are framing it. I need you to hear what I know before you decide what that means. The line was quiet, long enough that Maribel counted her own breaths. 15 minutes, Renata finally said. Not at the station. There's a park on the east side. Brenner Field. The picnic shelter near the back, 8:30. I'll be there, Maribel said. Brenner Field was mostly empty at that hour. A man walked a large brown dog along the far fence line. 2 joggers passed the main path and disappeared around a bend in the trail. The picnic shelter near the back sat under a cluster of oak trees that had dropped most of their leaves. The wooden table inside was damp from overnight air. Renata Solis was already there when Maribel arrived. She stood with her hands in her jacket pockets and her eyes moving across the open field before settling on Maribel with a look that was measuring but not unkind. She was in her mid-40s now, hair pulled back, a small scar near her chin that had not been there the last time they had sat across a table from each other. She looked like a woman who had carried more than her share of heavy years. Maribel laid the legal pad on the damp table between them. She did not start with Ridge. She started with Lila. She started with the injuries, and the behavioral patterns, and the fragments of testimony that a 4-year-old child had offered in broken sentences to a tattooed biker who had refused to walk away from her. Renata listened. She did not interrupt. Her eyes moved to the legal pad twice, but she did not reach for it. When Maribel finished, Renata was quiet for a moment. "Mercer," she said slowly. The name sat in the air between them. "Mercer," Maribel confirmed. Renata looked out across the empty field. Her jaw was tight. Something behind her eyes shifted. Not surprise exactly. More like recognition. Like a shape she had seen before in the dark, but had not been able to name until now. "I had a case 2 years ago," Renata said. "A child removed from a home on the north side. The paperwork got tangled, and the file was reassigned before I could follow it through." She paused. Mercer's name appeared once in the periphery of that file. "I flagged it. Nothing came of it." Maribel watched her carefully. "I want to see what you have," Renata said quietly. She reached out and pulled the legal pad toward her. It was not a promise. It was not a formal agreement, but it was a beginning. Quiet and careful and fragile the way all real beginnings are. Maribel sat down across from her and let her read. Ridge had been staring at the drawings for 3 hours. They were spread across the floor of a small back room, inside a tire shop owned by a man named Gus, one of the few club-adjacent contacts who had not yet turned his back. Gus had not asked questions. He had just pointed to the back room, dropped a folding chair near the door, and gone back to work without a word. The room smelled like rubber and old motor oil. A single hanging bulb cast yellow light down across the concrete floor. Ridge sat cross-legged in the middle of it, with Lila's drawings laid out in a rough grid around him. He had copied each one from memory and from the photographs he had taken before Maribel left with the originals. The copies were rough, but close enough. His handwriting was not gentle, but when he traced Lila's symbols with his finger, he was careful, deliberate. Like each mark she had made was a word in a language he was still learning. She had drawn the same shape more than once, a square with a circle inside it. Sometimes there were lines coming off the top like smoke or maybe like a chimney. Sometimes the circle had a smaller shape inside it that looked almost like a letter. Ridge had circled that symbol each time it appeared. It showed up in 6 separate drawings, spread across different pieces of paper. Lila had drawn it on a napkin, on the back of a gas station receipt, on the foggy window of the car once when she thought he was not watching. 6 times, always the same. He had matched it against what Maribel had decoded from the storage unit ledgers. There was a reference number that appeared 3 times in the financial records. A location code, 2 letters, and 4 digits. Maribel had flagged it, but neither of them had been able to place it before things fell apart. Ridge had written the code in the center of the floor on a torn piece of cardboard. Now he looked at Lila's circle in a square, and he thought about what a 4-year-old remembers. Not addresses, not street names, not directions or distances. She remembered shapes. She remembered the way a place felt, and what it looked like from the outside when light hit it a certain way. She remembered sounds and smells, and the specific kind of quiet that settles over a place where something bad happens behind closed walls. Ridge closed his eyes. He thought about what Lila had said in her sleep during one of their first nights in the cabin. He had written it down in small letters on the edge of a paper plate, because it was all he had close by. Round thing on top. Loud pipes at night. It smells like burnt sugar. He had not understood it then. He looked at her drawing again. The circle on top of the square. Loud pipes at night. He pulled out a folded county road map that Gus had left with him. He spread it beside the drawings and moved his finger slowly across the industrial sections east of town. His eyes tracked the roads, the rail lines, the older factory clusters that had been sitting half empty for years. His finger stopped. There was a grain processing facility, about 12 miles out on the county's eastern edge. It had closed down partially about 4 years back. Part of the structure had been converted and leased, but county records had been vague about what it was being used for. Maribel had noted it once as a possible match. It had a large cylindrical grain silo on the north end of the building, a round thing on top. Grain processing ran exhaust pipes through the night during active seasons, loud pipes. And burnt sugar was not an uncommon smell around grain and corn processing. Ridge sat very still. He looked at Lila's drawing one more time. The circle sitting on top of the square, the small shape inside the circle that he had not been able to read clearly. He looked closer. It was not a letter. It was a number. The tire shop was quiet by 9 o'clock. Gus had locked the front bay doors and turned off the main lights. The only glow came from the back room where Ridge, Maribel, and 2 others sat around a folding table covered in papers. The 2 others were Tommy Briggs and a woman named Sarah. Tommy was a former club prospect who had never fully patched in. He was lean and quiet, with careful eyes and a habit of thinking twice before speaking once. He had helped Ridge twice during the worst of the running. No questions asked. Just showed up when it mattered. Sarah worked dispatch for a county transport company. She knew roads. She knew shift patterns. She knew which routes the sheriff's department preferred on late-night sweeps, and which ones they avoided because of jurisdiction crossover. That knowledge was worth more tonight than almost anything else on the table. Maribel stood at the head of the table. She had a pen in her hand and a hand-drawn layout in front of her. It showed the grain facility and its surrounding property. She had pulled everything she could find. Satellite images printed at a copy center 2 towns over. Old county inspection filings. A decommissioned utility grid reference she had tracked through a public records request filed under a name that was not hers. She tapped the paper. "The main building runs east to west," she said. "The silo is on the north end. There are 2 entry points that show up in the inspection records. A front vehicle gate here." She marked it. "And a secondary access door on the western wall. Utility entry. It was flagged during the last inspection for a broken exterior latch that was never repaired." Ridge looked at the western wall mark. "That latch still broken?" "I cannot confirm it," Maribel said. "But nothing in the county records shows it was ever fixed." Tommy leaned forward. "What's between the western wall and the road?" "Scrub brush and about 60 yards of open ground," Sarah said. She traced the route with her finger. "But if you come in from Miller Creek Road instead of the county route, you stay in tree cover almost the whole way. There is a service pull-off about 100 yards from the western wall. It is used by utility crews. Nobody flags vehicles parked there overnight." Ridge nodded slowly. He had already been running the approach in his head since he left the tire shop floor 3 hours ago. The service pull-off matched what he had pictured. "What about inside?" he asked. Maribel pulled out a second sheet. "The original facility blueprints show a processing floor on the east side and a storage wing on the west. The storage wing is where I think she is." She paused. "The storage areas in these older buildings typically have interior rooms, smaller spaces, originally used for dry goods separation." Nobody said what they were all thinking. Ridge said it anyway. "Small enough for a child." The room got very quiet for a moment. Maribel continued. "I have been in contact with Detective Harlan Briggs. He is not Tommy's relation. He works out of the state investigative unit, not the county. He reviewed the financial documents I passed along through my contact at the advocacy office. He believes them." She set down her pen. "He is willing to create a diversion on the county route starting at 11. A staged traffic stop. Enough to pull the 2 county patrol units that cover that eastern grid away from the facility for a window of about 20 minutes. 20 minutes, Ridge said. "That is what he can give us," Maribel said. Ridge looked at the layout. He studied the western wall, the service pull-off, the storage wing. "That is enough," he said. Tommy looked at Sarah. Sarah gave a small nod. Maribel looked at Ridge. We go in quiet. No confrontation unless there is no other option. We locate her, we get her out, and we hand everything over to Harlan the moment we are clear. Ridge put his hand flat on the table. 11 o'clock, he said. We move. The sky was still black when Ridge pulled the motorcycle off the road. He cut the engine early and rolled the last stretch by hand, guiding it into the service pull-off Sarah had marked on the map. The tires crunched softly over loose gravel. He stopped beneath a cluster of scrub oak trees and leaned the bike against the largest trunk. He stood still for a moment, just listening. Wind moved through the dry brush. Somewhere far off, a dog barked twice and then stopped. Nothing else. The grain facility sat about 100 yards ahead. Ridge could make out its shape against the dark sky. The main building was long and low. The silo rose up on the north end like a dark tower. No lights inside. No movement along the fence line. That was good. He checked his watch. 10:48. He had 12 minutes before Harlan's diversion pulled the county patrol units east. He was not going to wait for the full window to start. He needed to be inside and moving before the first headlights disappeared down the county route. He wore dark clothes. A black jacket that was not his vest. Plain, dark jeans. He had left the cut behind on purpose. Tonight, he was not a Hell's Angel. Tonight he was just a man who needed to find a little girl. He moved away from the trees. The ground between the pull-off and the western wall was uneven. Tall, dry grass came up to his knees in places. He kept low and moved slow, placing each step carefully. The cold air pressed against his face. His breath came out in faint white clouds that disappeared quickly in the dark. He stayed wide of the fence line until he reached the point Maribel had marked. The western wall access door. He crouched in the brush about 15 yards out and watched the door for a full 2 minutes. Nothing moved. He closed the distance fast and pressed himself flat against the wall. The door was metal. Old. Rust had crept along the bottom edge and spread upward in uneven patches. He found the latch with his fingers and pressed it gently. It moved. The latch shifted with almost no resistance. The broken housing Maribel had pulled from the inspection records had never been repaired. The door swung inward on a slow, low groan. Ridge pushed it only as far as he needed and slipped through sideways into the dark interior. He stood still again, listening hard. The inside of the building smelled like rust and old grain dust, and something damp underneath it all. The kind of smell that meant a place had been closed up for a long time, but recently opened again. His eyes adjusted slowly. There was very little light. A thin gray line at the far end of the building where a window covering did not sit flush. That was all. He was in the storage wing. Just like Maribel had said. He moved along the interior wall, keeping one hand brushing lightly against the surface to guide him. His boots were quiet on the concrete floor. He passed 2 large empty bins that came up to his chest. Then, a section of shelving that had partially collapsed against itself. Then, he heard it. He stopped. It was very faint. A small sound, barely more than a breath. But he had spent enough nights in that farmhouse listening through darkness to know what it was. It was a child shifting in her sleep. Ridge turned toward the sound. There was a narrower passage ahead, between 2 interior partition walls. An enclosed section of the storage wing, just like Maribel had described. A smaller space separated from the main floor. He moved to the entrance of the passage and looked in. There was a thin mattress on the floor, and on it, curled beneath what looked like a gray wool blanket, was a small figure. Ridge went very still. He could not see her face clearly in the dark, but he could see her size, her shape, the small rise and fall of her breathing. She was there. She was alive. Ridge took one slow step into the passage. Then the door at the far end of the building swung open hard. Light flooded in from outside. A flashlight beam cut across the main floor like a knife. Ridge pressed himself back against the partition wall and held completely still. His heart hammered in his chest, but his body did not move. Not even a breath. Footsteps. More than one person. 2 sets. Maybe 3. Then a voice Ridge recognized immediately. Calm. Warm. The kind of voice that made people lean in and trust without thinking. Caleb Mercer. "Make it quick," Mercer said. His voice was low, but carried easily in the empty building. "I want her moved before sunrise. The other location is already prepared." Ridge's jaw tightened. He pressed his back harder into the wall and turned his head slowly toward the mattress. The small figure had gone still under the blanket. She had heard the voices too. Another voice, rougher and shorter, answered. "The transport is outside. 30 minutes. "Good," Mercer said. Footsteps crossed the main floor, moving toward the passage. Ridge had maybe 15 seconds. He looked at his watch. 11:02. Harlan's diversion was already running. That meant Maribel's contact, Deputy Reyes, was supposed to be 2 miles east right now, chasing a false call. The plan had assumed Mercer would not arrive until much later. The plan had assumed Ridge would have time. He did not have time. He pulled his phone from his jacket pocket and sent the single word they had agreed on. Now. He pressed send and slid the phone back into his pocket without looking at it again. The footsteps were getting closer. Ridge stepped fully into the passage and crouched beside the mattress. The small figure beneath the blanket had pulled it tighter around herself. He could see her eyes now in the dim light, wide open, terrified. "Hey," Ridge whispered. His voice was barely anything, just air, shaped into sound. "It's me." She blinked. He watched her face shift through something complicated in the space of a single second. Fear and recognition, and something that looked like it might crack him wide open. She reached for him. He gathered her up carefully, blanket and all, and stood. She pressed her face against his neck and did not make a sound. She was so small. He had forgotten how small she was. The footsteps stopped at the entrance to the passage. Mercer's flashlight beam landed directly on Ridge. For a moment, nobody moved. The beam held steady on his face. Ridge squinted against it, but did not look away. "Put her down," Mercer said. His voice had changed completely. The warmth was gone. What was underneath was flat and cold and very quiet. Ridge did not move. "I said put her down." Mercer stepped into the passage. His associate came in behind him and to the left. Ridge shifted his weight, angling his body so the girl was behind him as much as he could manage. "You got nowhere to go," the associate said. Then the far door exploded open. Not one set of footsteps this time. Many. Fast and purposeful and loud against the concrete floor. Flashlight beams multiplied and crossed each other in the dark, and voices came with them, hard and clear and official. "Police! Nobody move! Hands where I can see them!" Mercer spun toward the sound. His flashlight swung wide. His associate took one step back and ran directly into a second team coming through the western access door, the same door Ridge had entered through. There was a brief struggle, and then the sound of someone hitting the floor. Mercer did not run. He went very still instead. His hands came up slowly. He turned in a controlled circle, reading the room the way a man reads something he already knows the outcome of, but refuses to accept. Deputy Reyes came through the far door with 2 officers behind her. She moved directly to Mercer and spoke the words clearly and without any emotion at all. "Caleb Mercer, you are under arrest." The flashlight dropped from Mercer's hand and clattered across the concrete floor and went dark. The days that followed moved differently than Ridge expected. Not fast, not dramatic, not the way things looked in movies where everything gets resolved in a single loud moment and the credits roll. It moved slow, quiet, like water finding its way through cracks in stone. The arrest of Caleb Mercer was only the beginning. Within 48 hours of that night, investigators from 3 separate counties were comparing notes. The coded journals pulled from the storage unit months earlier had finally been properly decoded by a forensic accountant working with the state. What they found inside those documents connected names and locations across a wide area. Payment records, schedules, properties listed under shell company names that had looked clean on the surface for years. One by one, the doors of those properties were opened. What investigators found behind them confirmed everything Lila had whispered in broken fragments while half asleep. Everything she had drawn in small crayon pictures. Every name she had repeated without fully understanding what it meant. She had been telling the truth the whole time. The network had been careful. It had wrapped itself in good reputations, charity work, and church bulletins. It had used the kind of people nobody questioned. The kind of people who got thanked at community dinners and had their names on plaques outside meeting halls. That was exactly why it had lasted as long as it did. But careful things still leave traces. And those traces had been building quietly since the night Ridge carried a small girl out of a broken building wrapped in a torn red blanket. Ridge watched pieces of it unfold on a small television in the back room of Maribel's house. He sat in a wooden chair with his arms resting on his knees and his eyes fixed on the screen. Each news update added another piece, another arrest, another property searched, another name attached to charges. He did not feel relief exactly. Not yet. He felt something heavier than that. Like a man setting down a weight he had carried so long, he had forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. Maribel came in on the 3rd evening and set a mug of coffee on the table beside him without saying anything. She sat across from him and wrapped her own hands around her mug. The television was off this time. The room was quiet. "They want to talk to you tomorrow," she said finally. "Officially." Ridge looked up. "Detective Okafor," she said. "He's the one who re-examined the case. He's been fair. I've dealt with him before." Ridge nodded slowly. "You should sleep tonight," Maribel said. "You look like a man who hasn't slept in 3 weeks." "I haven't slept in 3 weeks," Ridge said. She almost smiled at that. The meeting with Detective Okafor happened the following morning in a small conference room in a county building that smelled like old carpet and copy paper. Ridge sat on one side of a plain table. Okafor sat on the other. He was a broad man with steady eyes and a habit of folding his hands flat on the table when he spoke. He laid out what they had confirmed. He asked Ridge questions that Ridge answered without hesitation. He listened without interrupting. At the end of it, Okafor leaned back in his chair and looked at Ridge for a long moment. "Every charge against you has been reviewed," Okafor said. "The witness statements tied to Mercer's people have been discredited. The planted evidence has been identified and logged." He paused. "You are officially cleared. All of it." Ridge sat very still. "I want to be direct with you," Okafor continued. "What you did was not the right way to handle it. Running, going off grid, taking a child without authorization." He held Ridge's gaze. "But I also understand why you did it. And I believe the outcome speaks for itself." Ridge exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled. He was a free man again, on paper, in the eyes of the law. But something inside him had shifted in those weeks, in a way that paperwork could not measure, and no official statement could put back the way it had been before. He was not the same man who had walked into that building. The foster home sat on a quiet street, lined with oak trees, whose branches were just starting to show the first pale green buds of early spring. It was a yellow house, cheerful in a simple, honest way. A porch swing hung near the front door. A wind chime made of small wooden birds turned slowly in the breeze. A garden bed along the front walk still had the dry stalks of last year's flowers standing in it, waiting for someone to tend them again. Ridge sat in his truck across the street. He had been sitting there for about 10 minutes. Not because he was nervous exactly. He just needed a moment before he went in. A quiet moment to let everything settle before he moved again. It had been 6 weeks since the arrests. 6 weeks since Lila had been placed in the care of a woman named Donna Reyes, a licensed foster parent with a calm voice, patient eyes, and a house that smelled like fresh bread and laundry detergent. Social services had allowed supervised visits. Maribel had helped navigate the paperwork. It had taken time, and multiple meetings, and more patience than Ridge had thought himself capable of. But eventually, the visits had been approved. Regular ones. Today was the 4th visit. He climbed out of the truck and crossed the street. His boots made quiet sounds on the front walk. The wind chime shifted. The wooden birds turned. Donna opened the door before he could knock. She was a woman in her early 50s, with short, silver-streaked hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She smiled at him the way people smile when they've decided they trust you, but still want to stay watchful. Ridge respected that. "She's been up since 6, Donna said, stepping back to let him in. "She knew you were coming today." He stepped inside. The house was warm. Morning light came through white curtains and lay in soft squares across the wooden floor. A small pair of sneakers sat by the door, the laces still undone. A coloring book was open on the coffee table with a box of crayons tipped on its side beside it. Then he heard her feet on the floor. Lila appeared at the end of the hallway, in a yellow shirt and small blue jeans. Her hair was brushed. Her face was healing in ways that were visible now. The bruising was long gone. The hollowness that had lived behind her eyes was slowly, carefully, filling in with something softer. She stopped when she saw him. Then she walked toward him. Not running, just steady and sure. Ridge crouched down to her level. She held out a folded piece of paper, both hands, like she was offering him something important. "I made this for you," she said. Her voice was quiet, but clear. He took it carefully and unfolded it. It was drawn in crayon. The lines were crooked the way a 4-year-old's lines always are, full of good intentions and honest effort. A bright yellow sun filled most of the top of the page. Below it were 2 figures standing side by side. The smaller one had a yellow shirt. The taller one had dark hair and what looked like a jacket with some kind of mark on the back. Lila had written something at the bottom in large, careful letters. Some of them were backwards. Some were wobbly. But every single one of them was legible. It said, "You didn't kill me fast. You saved me slow." Ridge stared at those words for a long time. His chest pulled tight. His throat closed around whatever he might have said. He pressed his lips together and breathed through his nose and let the feeling move through him without fighting it. She was watching him with wide, patient eyes. He folded the drawing carefully along its original crease and held it against his chest. "Thank you," he said. His voice was rough but steady. She nodded like that was exactly the right answer. "I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day."